Welcome to Haxby Shed and the Shaper Miller project, part 2. Next day, I set this up in the forejaw and I countersunk that edge there just to make it nice and neat. And now I need to drill 4 holes in this plate to correspond to these 4 screw positions. Now if I'd been smarter, I would have marked a pitch circle on here. But I didn't think of it, but I can work it out from the drawing, which tells me that that diagonal there is 85 apart. So with a bit of trig, I can figure out the displacement, X and Y. When I was at school, we used to say, Miss, why do we have to do maths? Well, this is why. We know between any 2 holes we've got 85 spacing. If we draw that as a triangle with a hypotenuse of 42.5, take an angle of 45, sine 45 is 0.7071, multiply it by this, gives you this. So we know it's 30 up and 30 across. And with that, I can mark it off. I've still got my crosshairs on here, showing the centre of this circle. I know these sides are just about parallel, so I can slip that onto there and measure out 30 from that centre line. Put a mark on that and do the same the other way. I'll do this off camera because it's getting a bit tricky, but you get the idea. And then I only have to mark 1 because I'm going to use my rotating indexing base, and when I've got 1 positioned, I'll just drill the other 3. I centre drilled this on my small bench drill because I've got far more control over that. Now what I'll do, I'll drill this all the way through, I'll take this off, try it on the motor. Although it's a bit of a nuisance to set it up again to do the others, you know, if I've made a mistake, at least I'll only have 1 hole out of line and not 4. This is a nice little chuck. Tony gave me that. Thank you, Tony, if you're watching. That drill is so much smoother and quieter now since I made those improvements. Refer to previous video. Well, the radius was right, but the rotational position was a bit out. It just meant the plate would have been on a little bit skew. I don't really want that, so I'm just going to open this 1 hole out using an end mill on this. Can't get my file in at the moment. Come on. I'm still working on this and I'm trying to figure out how I get it so wrong. And then I look at these 4 holes and they're actually indexed round this way. So my beautifully square on hole gives me that. See that difference between this and this edge against this piece of wood? It needs to be more like that. Now I'm happy with it. Let's start with the opposite. There's a little bit of fitting to do, but that's basically okay now and square. You probably think that I've become obsessed with this, but I'm trying to work out whether those 4 screws there in the front of that motor plate are true or whether they're rotated round. So I'll set up a laser in my pillar drill, firing down onto that motor, and from that I should be able to work it out. I'm going to measure from that laser line to the position of the 4 screws. Comparing this laser line with these blue marks, tells me that actually there's nothing wrong with this. It was down to me. I didn't allow for the fact that this swivels a little bit. I should have got it centralised before I started. And then I probably made a mistake with the marking out on my plate. I just have to swallow my pride and admit it. The next thing to do is to machine the curve that I want on this side here. So I'll start by just hacksawing the corners off. I'm just trimming the back edge very slightly. I've set my plate up on here. I was going to use an end mill, but I've realised I've got a carbide burr, which might be better. I've set my drill on to the fastest speed, 2,500 RPM. Maybe it should be faster for this burr, but that's just as fast as it goes. I think I've lined it up correctly. I've tried a little bit here, you can see on the sides. And I'll keep working with it, and I'll see how close I can get it to the line that I've scribed. If it's not lining up quite right, I'll just give everything a little tap. I put the cut on by loosening off the table and just giving this a bit of a tap when it's there, and that just gives me a little bit more cut. I think this might be the last cut. Well, I'm very happy with that. Let's see if it fits. That's almost a perfect track against my scribed line. I'm pleased with that. That bracket's finished now. This curve follows perfectly, and this surface is unpolished. It's just as it finished with the burr. Let's get started on the vertical plate. Before I drill any holes, I just want to make sure that I've got them in the right place. That hole, scribed line, line up with these two. Yep. Plate on, so now we've got to figure out where to cut it. It should be here, but I want to put the motor on and position it first before I start cutting anything. I've propped the motor up in position on this. Don't worry if it looks a bit wonky, I just want to see where the brackets are going to come. That's fine. I've taken the feet off the motor. There'll be a bracket that comes across here, like this. And I want to make sure that my cut line, as I cut this plate, is above. And it is, because my cut line is there. So now I can chop that away with confidence. I'm going to cut this plate twice because I want two pieces for welding practice. Well, I think that looks pretty good. These two screws are 3/8 UNC. I used to think they were 3/8 Whitworth until somebody educated me. But the clue is that the heads are AF and not Whitworth heads. Well, that's nicely shaped it. So next I'll see if I can repeat the trick with the burr on that rotating stand. Let's see what we can do with this then. You can see as I rotate this, the centre pop is moving out of line with this. So I need to adjust the jaws now so that this centre pop remains stationary under the point. Well, that's got it lined up in the chuck. If it isn't exact, it's very close. I think I've got everything lined up now, but I may have to make some fine adjustments as I go along. I'm also going to have to make sure that I don't hit this jaw and the one at the other side, of course. So we'll start there and work carefully around. I've loosened off the table and I'll just give it a very careful nudge to add a bit more cut. And lock it back up again. Start from this side. Well, that was tight up against these jaws, but I just managed to get it done. That's pretty close, and in fact this casting itself might not be totally symmetrical. It's time to tack these two parts of the bracket together, and I'll do that here and here. Now, if you saw my video, Diary of a TIG Welding Beginner 6, you would have seen me practicing on this. Same material. And this was my finishing weld, which I'm happy with, which was with a number 6 gas lens, 125 amps, 6 litres per minute gas, and a chrome moly rod, ER80 SD2. So that's what I'm going to try. Acetone. So this is just a tack. Guard your eyes. Try and get comfortable. I feel like I'm finally getting somewhere with TIG. That's alright, isn't it? I'll do the other side now. I realise this is thick plate, which is pretty easy relative to anything thin, but still, I feel really pleased with that. Turning it over, it's sprung a bit. I meant to clamp it before I welded, but I forgot, but it's okay. I tightened it up, checked all my angles, I'm happy, so I'll tack this bit here now. Now I'll have to decide how much weld to put on this. It doesn't need a massive fillet, not to hold that motor, especially as there will be straps here at the top. Now when I was doing my practice piece, I found that I distorted the base. Clearly I don't want that. So that's something for me to think about. But I'll get the motor onto here now, and then I'll make the straps, and then I'll weld it all up when I'm finished and I'm happy with it. I think this bracket will take the weight of the motor, even with just a tack. And that really shows again that I don't need to go mad welding the fillet. I don't want to distort the plate. I think that looks good. Get these side straps on here. Now, obviously just short ones, look. It looks pretty good from all angles. I need to free this head off, that's too stiff. It's on my jobs list. Yes, I think we're on our way with this now. There's a threaded hole here that I can use to fix this end of the top mounting strap. Marking out ink disaster, I knocked it off the table and it rolled into the corner before I could stop it. This is set up for welding. I'm just going to spot these two here and here, and then if I need to I can make some fine adjustments. I've had to make some spacers to go in there, just about 2.5mm spacers. Next job is to properly weld all these plates together. So I'll probably start doing the sides of these top brackets here and the one on the other side over here, and then probably this. And I'll do that off camera so that I can relax. I was going very well until there. No filler wire. But then I fluffed it. I don't know what I did. Dipped it. I don't know. But I had to clean it up afterwards. I've had to do a little bit of press work, to be honest, to get it to fit, because actually this back plate and the bracket were fine, but just the tongue at the bottom here, this semicircular bit underneath, had just sort of kicked up. And I think that's because I made a much bigger fillet on the bottom edge, bigger than I really wanted to. Well, you know, I was in learning mode. If I could have done it all like that, I'd have been very pleased. So this bracket coming out has stayed 90 to this vertical bracket here, which was the important thing. And the fact that the rounded part at the bottom of this bracket kicked out a bit and had to be flattened out by the press really doesn't matter. So the bracket's finished now, it just needs cleaning up and painting. The bracket has gone to the other shed for painting. So now it's time to think about the collet. I bought this from AliExpress for £18 delivered. And that's the first time I'd used AliExpress. It was supposed to take a month to arrive, and it actually arrived in about 2 weeks. It's got a 14mm hole, which is the same as this shaft, and it's got 2 grub screws here. It's a very nice piece of equipment actually. ER32. What I want to do is see if I can put a keyway in it. Now I think it's going to be unlikely because it's very hard and I just don't think I'm going to be able to do it, but I am going to try. I'm just going to see if I can scratch this. I've got a small boring bar and a little bit of sharp high-speed steel. I'll make a couple of passes, see what happens. The keyway shoulder is only about this long here, so it's quite short. It does seem to be leaving some impression on it. Obviously this bar is flexing a little bit. This is pretty much locked. With a lathe in low gear, it's very hard to turn this, so it's pretty much holding it steady. Well, I'm surprised, but you can see that it is having an effect. So I'm going to sharpen up a bit of high-speed steel, 5mm wide, the dimension for the key. Well, it's going to take a lot of luck for this to work properly. I've cut my tool 5mm wide, but it doesn't index in that bar perfectly. And I may have ground more off one side than the other, so it may not be central in that bar. I'm going to move that cutting tool back so that it's just scratching the surface. And then at each pass I'll have to unscrew it, advance the tool, screw it up, repeat, repeat, repeat. Well, this is a setup. ER32 14mm collet in here. and I'll just wind it in and out from the tailstock. And I'll set it manually on here. One of the problems is there's nowhere really for the swarf to go. Well, it's working, but it's taken me half an hour or more to do that much. My goodness, this is hard work. It's probably taken me about 2 hours to get to this point. But I think I've got about 0.2 of a millimetre to come off that yet. This is going to be my last cut, and I'll do it on the press. Bang. Hopefully it didn't break anything. The problem is you need to put on a fairly fierce cut. If you just put on a slight cut, all that happens is as you push it through, it pushes the cutting tool back into the bar. So it has to have some bite. The 14mm reamer has arrived, £12.50. It's as good as brand new. I would rather have paid £2 at the Auto Jumble, but you've got to find them first, haven't you? I've got the Collet chuck set up in the forejaw, and it's spinning to within half a thou, or 1/100th of a millimetre. And I'm making a big assumption that this outer is concentric with the inner, but I can't clock the inner. So this is 14mm, and the motor shaft is 14mm. So even after this, we might be still a bit tight on that motor shaft. But I just didn't want to bore it out, because I could guarantee, I'd get the thing egg-shaped. This should just be a scrape. It's going in easy enough. That fits perfectly. So now I need to see if I can get my key to fit. Oh my goodness, it fits. I'm not going to knock it right on because it needs to come off again, because I've decided to buy a thrust bearing to sit behind here, and that won't arrive for another couple of days. It's in your mouth, silly Billy.